it's Megan, and I'm impatient and I want it now. All jokes aside, I am doing a review of Kingdom of the Wicked by Carrie Maniscalco, and this is not my first rodeo with Carrie Maniscalco. I read her Stalking Jack the Ripper series, which is on my shelf here, and I absolutely loved it. So I went into this with high hopes. Picture it. Sicily, 1880 or 90 something. Okay, Sophia I am not, but this book is about twin witches Vittoria and Amelia who work for their family in their Sicilian restaurant, and it is a very well-known restaurant. And one night, Vittoria does not make it to the dinner service, so Amelia decides to go looking for her, and she finds her under the church, wrapped in a shroud, missing her heart. Unable to let her anger go at her sister's killer, Amelia decides that she's going to do whatever it takes to bring that killer to justice, even if she has to use dark magic to do it. Her search brings her to discover that her sister was attempting to summon a demon, and so Amelia decides to follow her down that dark path. Wrath is one of the 7 princes of hell, and he is also one of the demons that Vittoria and Amelia have been warned about their entire lives. Well, when Amelia summons him, she binds them together irrevocably, and that's when things get a little bit spicy. I did get to read this one as an ebook, so I wrote down my thoughts in my reading bullet journal, and I'm going to be sharing those with you guys today. So Amelia is the quiet, reserved twin, whereas Vittoria is the brash, outspoken one. And of course, Vittoria, the brash one, ends up murdered. And so I feel like I've read this trope a million times before. I think it might have been a little bit more interesting to have the brash one have to avenge the quiet one, but it's not my book. I can't tell her what to do, but that was just a thought that popped into my head. Wrath is your typical bad boy. He knows exactly who he is and what he's doing, and he makes a lot of threats, but he doesn't actually follow through on those threats very often. So I knew exactly what he was doing and what he was about midway through the book, and so it didn't really surprise me, some of the things that he did, but I feel like there was a power imbalance, but I'll talk about that more in a minute. So I knew who the bad guy was about 5 pages after Vittoria was killed, and that is not necessarily a bad thing, but it was a suspicion, and then a few chapters later it was like, okay, yeah, this is the guy. This is the person who did it. I want to see what Amelia does when she finds out. Now, there really wasn't anything wrong with the villain per se. I think that it was done very well, but he was more of an absentee villain through most of the story. The secondary big bad, if you will. The main big bad hid himself in with the humans very well, didn't draw too much attention to himself, and the book did keep you guessing on which one was the big bad throughout most of it. I had it figured out, but I think that some people will be surprised at who it ends up being. I honestly fell in love with the execution of the Princes of Hell. I think that basing them off of the 7 deadly sins was chef's kiss. I liked it a lot. It was kind of spicy, and every interaction with the princes that you meet throughout the story makes you think of the sins a little bit differently, seeing how they can be more dangerous. And the ones that you don't necessarily think are the really dangerous ones, it proves otherwise. Amelia, she goes from this reserved twin to chaotic, and she becomes unpredictable in her actions, and her entire motivation is finding her sister's killer and getting revenge. And of course, you can see that she's burying her grief and focusing on the revenge so she doesn't actually have to process that she's lost her sister. Her family encourages her to let go of that anger because they know it will destroy her. But of course, Amelia refuses, and that's what pushes this story forward. I did love how Amelia turned into this morally ambiguous character, whereas at the beginning she was the pure, always using good magic, white magic. It didn't actually ever say white magic, but it was always about following the rules. And the second her sister died, it all went out the window, and she started dabbling in things that she had been warned against her entire life, like black magic, dark magic, and, you know, summoning a demon. It was it was very much a power dynamics shift. The power dynamic in this story is very different because Emilia will go and she'll be able to trick one of the 7 princes, but then her powers are never truly defined, and neither are the princes, and you can see how they can trap someone, but at the same time she fights it off at certain spots, and it's very ambiguous, and I didn't like that quite as much about the writing. I think that it should have been a little bit more defined, but all in all, it made a great read. The plot itself was something I felt very familiar with and felt very new all at once. One of the things that I didn't quite like as much was the lack of follow-through on some of the things that were happening in the plot. I think that maybe those will be wrapped up in the next novel in the series, but at this point I don't know. I think of Kerri Maniscalco, and I think one of her greatest strengths is in her world building. She has this way of just pulling you in and letting you see the world that she's creating so vividly. And a lot of the ways that she does this is through the 5 senses. Now, a big focus in the beginning at least, and throughout a lot of the story, was food. And honestly, I wanted to eat Italian food after I finished reading this. I wanted to eat it so bad, but I didn't. I refrained. That's not the point. I want Italian food. One of the things that pulled me out of the story was the investigation of Vittoria's death was very repetitive. Now, I know in real life investigations, it's a lot about asking the same questions at the right times. And of course, in this fictional world, we wanted to see things move a little faster. But Emilia just seemed to repeat herself quite often, and while not exactly helpless, she did require certain nudges to keep moving forward. I loved how the demon that was paired up with Emilia was wrath, because that is exactly the emotion she was feeling. And so there is that attraction there because of that feeling of pure anger and seeking revenge and retribution, and that is the epitome of wrath. So I loved that dynamic. Another thing that kind of annoyed me of the story was it mentions in a few places that the witches were being persecuted by both the church and witch hunters, but it was never really made a big deal. Emilia never really hid herself from the humans. She never really stopped to hide her actions to protect the people around her. I mean, she did like once or twice, but a lot of the things she was just doing out in the open. Like, there's a scene where she's fighting a lesser demon. People should have noticed, and it kind of drove me nuts that there wasn't enough focus on that, because I think that would have added another layer to this story that would have added slightly more realism to the story. Like I said, the power dynamics weren't really defined, neither was the magic. I think that could have been done better. In regards to individuality, this book really had no representation besides hetero, and that's okay. That's great. Not every story has to be chock full of representation. I think that it was a choice. I enjoyed it. I hope the next book has more representation, especially considering, oh, I can't say, that's a spoiler. I will say this, the novel itself was very dark and atmospheric and very moody, and that is my aesthetic. So, I mean, obviously. So I did enjoy it, and I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. Now, one thing I do want to say is the next book doesn't come out until later this year. It's very disappointing to me because I want to read it already. You know, I want to continue on with the series. I really do enjoy Kerri Maniscalco's writing, despite the flaws that I mentioned. I think this is a great book, and I highly recommend it. If you guys read it, comment down below and let me know what your favorite part was, because there are so many things. And feel free in the comments to go spoiler heavy. I love that. If you guys want to follow along with me on this reading journey, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!